Hi there. So I'm just going to talk to you very quickly about what to do when a tenant gives notice. Now, I've spoken to a lot of landlords and letting agents in the recent weeks where tenants are giving notice and we're not really sure what to do. What are the next steps? So there's two possibilities that are going to happen here. First of all, the tenant's going to be in a fixed term contract, or they're going to be in periodic. Now, what you do for either of those is slightly different. So we'll start with the fixed term. So if a tenant is in a fixed term contract and they give you notice, legally you don't have to accept it and they are bound until the end of their contract. Now, let's look at this from a practical point of view. If the tenant is struggling to pay the rent, for example, or needs to move away, or something really practical has happened in their life that they had no control over, and they're, say, only 2 or 3 months into a 12-month contract, it would make more sense to you as landlords to allow them to leave in a reasonable time scale to make sure that you're not financially at a loss. So the way we would do that is we would ask the tenant to give their notice, usually a month's notice in line with their rent due date, but also for them to understand that they would be liable for the rent up until the day before a new tenant moved in. They may also be responsible for the costs of reletting the property, but also bear in mind that they are capped by the Tenant Fee Ban Act, so you can only charge sort of £50, etc. with that. There was a case recently which was Ludlow Thompson versus Brennan being the tenant, who wanted to vacate early, and Ludlow and Thompson charged them £385. This then went to court and Ludlow Thompson lost and had to repay the full £385. So just bear in mind that if you're charging a tenant to leave mid-term, just to be reasonable with those costs. Now, if a tenant is vacating from a periodic, this is really, really simple. All they've got to do is give you 1 month's notice in line with their rent due date and they're gone. That's it, nothing else to do. Now, where it gets a little bit complicated is basically with the fixed term and the periodic. What if they've given notice and they don't leave? Well, in the fixed term, there really isn't anything you can do. They're still bound by that fixed term contract. If they change their mind, choose not to leave, nothing you can do, really. You can't serve them notice unless it's in line with ending the fixed term at its natural time, because you can't end a fixed term earlier than it would naturally end. So they're bound by the fixed term contract. If you've already signed another tenant up, taken some holding deposit or something like that, then you would be in a little bit of a problem with that person because you have signed a contract. So contractually, you would legally have to provide them accommodation unless you can negotiate with them to end that contract. Remember, it's not a tenancy agreement until somebody moves in. So you need occupation to get a tenancy agreement. Up to that point, it's just a contract. Now, with a periodic, if the tenant doesn't leave, what are you going to do? Well, the standard thing would be serve Section 21 if you don't want them to stay. But I would say the best thing to do is, as soon as the tenant gives you notice, acknowledge that notice and send them a response that clearly outlines if they do not leave, they will be liable for double rent. Now, the way that you write this in is, thank you very much for your notice. I understand that you will be leaving on such and such a date. Please be mindful, if you do not leave on this date, I am likely to charge you double rent under this Distress for Rent Act. Now, the Distress for Rent Act is one of those acts we rely on, even though it was born in the 1700s. It's one of those antiquated laws that haven't yet been updated, but thankfully we can still use it. And as long as you have given that tenant notice, basically as soon as you've received their notice, tell them that you may rely on the Distress for Rent Act to be charging them double rent from the day after they refuse to leave, or they don't leave, not refuse to leave, but don't leave. Sometimes this is enough to make sure a tenant does actually pack their bags and leave because they don't want to be paying double rent. So just to really recap very quickly for you, if they're in a fixed term and they don't leave, not really a lot you can do. But if they're in a periodic, give you notice and they don't leave, you can charge double rent. But just make sure that you are giving them that information as soon as you receive their notice that you'll be charging them double rent. Any questions, just come back to me and I will put the link to the legislation for the double rent in the comments. Thank you.